Time for the special call. I'd like to call this meeting to order Tuesday, September 9th, 2014. First public budget hearing special call meeting to order. It's approximately 5:45. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Councilwoman Fairclough.
Here.
Councilwoman Woolman.
Here.
Councilman Burgess. Councilman Maldonado.
Here.
Councilman Williams.
Here.
Vice Mayor Shelley. Mayor Porter.
Here. Any additions, deletions? Mr. Attorney, order of business.
Yes, none at this time, Mayor. Yes, just briefly before we get into the budget hearing, as you mentioned, this is the first public hearing on the proposed millage and tentative budget for the city's fiscal year 2014-2015. The procedures that will follow tonight are pursuant to Florida statutory procedures. I'll introduce and read the resolution on the proposed millage and the ordinance on the proposed budget. Afterwards, we'll open the public hearing on both items to be discussed collectively. I'll provide a brief statement on the proposed millage, turn it over to the manager for his presentation. Afterwards, you can open to public comment and questions, and on the conclusion of the public hearing, you all will need to take a vote separately on both the resolution and the ordinance.
Okay.
So the tab 1 is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Homestead, Florida, establishing a proposed operating millage rate of ad valorem taxation and establishing a proposed millage rate for the debt service on the general obligation bonds for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2014 and ending September 30th, 2015. And tab 2 is the the first reading of an ordinance of the City of Homestead, Florida, adopting the budget for each of the several funds and departments of the city for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2014, and ending September 30th, 2015, providing for repealer, severability, and an effective date. Mayor, the City of Homestead's proposed operating millage rate is 5.9215 mils, which is the same as the previous year's millage rate, and the proposed debt millage rate is 1.0100 mils. Rollback rate millage rate is 5.4080 mils. The proposed operating millage rate is 5.9215. It's 9.5% above the rollback rate of 5.4080 mils. And at this time, I'll turn it over to the manager.
All right, Mr. Manager, you're up.
Okay. I guess, Elizabeth, excuse my back, everyone. Okay. Well, here we are again, and the clicker is not working. There we go. Okay. Okay, this slide, I guess it dawned on me yesterday that I've used this slide in Florida. I came here 10 years ago, and I've used this slide ever since with every elected body that I've worked with. And they all want the same thing. George, no millage rate increase. George, no reduction in services. George, no city fees. No increases in city fees. And of course, nobody wants to lay anybody off. Now, I'm grateful that we've been able to maintain this philosophy all these years. And certainly, I've been with you now for almost 4 years. And we've talked about this every year. And we know what's been going on, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I think we need to have the discussion one more time. This is what we're faced with currently, Florida law. And this is all kind of wrapped in one, but as you'll recall, several years back, there was the big debate over tax reform up in Tallahassee, and they set certain rules, and it's one of the reasons why James talked about, he read a statement, and there's certain things that the state law now requires us to say, and it's part of the discussion when it wasn't always part of the discussion, and that is the state says we can't go above 10 in millage, and they also define what a rollback rate is, and they also say that if you, in essence, take in more revenue than you did the year before, then they call that a tax increase. Now, in the old days, prior to the tax reform, if you didn't increase the millage rate, there was no tax increase. So the language has changed a little bit, but the truth of the matter is that what we're proposing here is no increase in the millage rate, which is what we've done. This is, I guess the city has done this now the last 4 years. Carlos, 4 years, 5 years? Okay, so that's the proposal from the budget. Now, if you can see the difference between the rollback rate and the proposed millage rate, The difference in dollars is roughly $700,000, roughly. Seven, you want to give an exact number?
Approximately $771,000.
Okay, almost $800,000. And so there's the rub right there is cities all over the state say, geez, each year our expenses go up. And if we don't have more money to pay for those expenses, and we'll kind of talk about what the annual expenses are and what cities face, if you don't take in that revenue, then you don't have enough money to pay your expenses, and therefore then you start relying on other revenue sources in order to pay those recurring expenses, and therein lies the rub, is that now you start using non-recurring revenues for recurring expenses, which creates a hole for your organization, and that's been going on all over the state for one reason. The economy dropped like a rock. People were just trying to hang on to what they had, and so the strategy was, and continues to be, to just try to get by with your current revenues, and if you need to use some non-recurring revenues to meet those expenses, then we'll do that. Those are our rainy day funds until the clouds clear and the skies clear and the sun comes out and things normalize. But as you'll see in some of the presentation here, Homestead has gotten hit substantially worse than most places, and therein is the dilemma that we faced and the strategy that we've employed over the years, and this really tells the story. In 2008, you had roughly $4 billion in property values, and today, your property values are $1.95 billion. So that really tells the story of it's halved, 50.8%. So even though last year we had just a tiny uptick, 0.12%, and this year we had a nice healthy 8% increase, the hole that's been dug here is basically a $2 billion hole. And several of you have said this over the years, and I agree, is that you can't really tax your way out of this problem, because if you went ahead and you set your millage rate to accommodate this hole, you're talking at least $4 million worth of revenue, probably more like $5 that you have to catch up with. And if you went ahead and set the millage rate, we're talking probably somewhere around 9?
About 8.9.
Right, so almost 9 millage rate to tax your way out of this hole. So the first thing we said was, okay, when we have the rain, deal with the rainy day fund. Try to hang on to everything that you have. There's always time to gut your government. So at any time, in any given year, you have the ability, we have the ability to gut government services, and that is the other way to deal with a $5 million hole, is close parks and cut police officers and substantially reduce the services that government provides. So the strategy here has been, well, let's not go crazy yet, because we have rainy day funds. We have a way to try to balance things off and smooth our way through this problem. And as we've seen this hole, we went from $1 million to $2 million to $4 million. And now we're roughly $5 million, but the digging has slowed. And so the hope is, between a little extra revenue that we're getting as the property values start to inch up, assuming you allow us to keep those extra dollars, and also as the economy continues to grow and we see new construction, hopefully we'll start trending upwards so that we're no longer at the $2 billion, but we're closer to the $4 billion. I would doubt very much that in a year or two we're going to go from $2 billion to $4 billion. We've got a lot of climbing in order to get out of that hole because of this property values problem, but that's not your fault. That's not the staff's fault. That's not the public's fault. Homestead got hit hard, and harder than most communities. And the good news here, and I think we all as city staff appreciate, is that nobody got thrown under the bus. Nobody got thrown overboard. And as we all went around the city during the bond referendum, probably 30 presentations later, what we found is that the public doesn't want services gut either. And they're appreciative of the fact that you held the government together, because they appreciate the services that you provide. So that's the strategy. Is it the best strategy? No, the best strategy, any accountant will tell you, raise the taxes up to 9. Revenues should equal expenses, always, always, and that's how you deal with your issues. Well, I don't think the public would support that. I can't see even one of you voting for something like that. I wouldn't support that as the city manager, and just the reality of trying to glide our way back to some reality. This is the second slide that also shows the problem, and that is that in '09, your ad valorem tax, this comes directly from the property tax. You were at almost 17 million, 16.6, and now you're down to 9.93, almost 10. So that is a 40% decrease. That 40% is $6.72 million. So you see how you start thinking, well, five, and this is where your problem is. And so the money's not coming in, and lo and behold, now let's look at the history of the city. Back in '05, you had a general fund budget of $35 million. Why do I mention that? Is because I know I have the statistic that says in 2005, you had roughly 38,000 in population. Well, what's happened since then is your population has grown. You're now at almost 65,000. Meanwhile, 67% growth in population, property values halve, revenues go down by $6 million. In the meantime, cost of living is going up. Each year, CPI is going up. So like any organization, including your own households, electricity goes up, water goes up, cable goes up, insurance goes up, everything is going up. You have less money, and now you have more people in the household. Because before you may have had 4, now you have 6. So in this particular case, you're servicing a lot more people with less money, and the money that you have is worth less because the cost of living went up. So it costs you more to buy the same stuff. So this is really, the history here is very important so that we can kind of understand what we do going forward. And our recommendation is to continue with the strategy that we've employed, which is recognizing right now, even as we speak, we don't have enough money to pay for the services that everybody relies on. And every department says the same thing because this is what they hear from you and the public, which is we want more service because there's more of us. Right? So we want more police officers, we want more code inspectors, we want more parks, we want more programs. Everybody wants and expects more because there's more of us now to service. Only problem is now 2007 is when we had our highest general fund budget, $47 million. We're proposing $44 million. So that's another example of how you have less money and you have more people to serve. But I didn't want to be all doom and gloom because I saw today Tim Cook from Apple, and he went out there with great excitement waving around that Apple Watch, and it was neat and it was shiny and it was exciting. And I feel that same way about this city because I know we've got a big hole to climb out of, and like I said, it's nobody's fault. But I feel that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and I think you all do as well. Why do I think that? Well, here's one example. And you're going to see in the expense side of the budget, this is one of the areas where you're going to see some additional spending. From 2010 to 2014, your permit and inspection transactions went from 13,000 to almost 27,000. That's an indication that your economy is now starting to grow. People are coming back and they're starting to build. And as more and more of that happens, the new construction numbers will start climbing up. And that's the one piece of the state law that's not considered the tax increase, correct, Carlos? New construction. So every dollar of new construction that comes your way, not considered a tax increase because that's new money coming in. That is not based on any of the assessments from the current property owners. We also have a new city hall under construction, and the bond referendum was approved, which means great things coming for the downtown, including the city hall. And I wanted to point this screen out because the public sent you a pretty clear message, I think, and that was that they believe in what this government is doing. They believe what you're all doing. 74% said yes on the police station. 64% said yes on the Seminole Theater. And they said, we're willing to pay a little extra money because we have faith in the downtown and we want to see something special happening in the downtown. And we believe, as we talk philosophically about growing our way out of our problems instead of taxing our way out of the problem, if we can enhance the downtown, enhance the quality of life in the city, improve the city's image, create amenities that the city currently doesn't have, property values go up, more people want to come into the city, it becomes a better place to live, and that's a good investment downstream. Temporary police station is underway, as you all know. New police station, you authorized the hiring of the architects. They're starting to gear up. Seminole Theater, you hired the architects, and now they're starting to go in the theater. They're starting to map everything out, and soon we'll have a progress report for you. The hope is by the end of next year, those doors will be open, so that's what we're shooting for. And then we've been spending a whole lot of time on this parking garage concept, so we can come back to you with some real numbers and some real planning here on building that parking lot on the space where the police station currently is, getting some additional street-level retail, maybe bringing some new retailers into the downtown, and meeting the demands of the parking for both the Seminole Theater and also the retailers down the avenue, and then also potentially for our iconic attraction. We heard from the iconic attraction consultant 2 days ago. They said they're working on a proposal, and they should have something. Rick, I think they said they're meeting on the 12th, correct?
Yes, they're meeting on the 12th.
So this is an exciting component, too, if we can get the funding for this from the outside financial community. So downtown, very exciting, potentially a possibility to bring the library downtown as well, the trolley hub. All these things add to the strategy of a little bit of extra money that comes in. We should grab it if we can without overburdening the taxpayers, but also let's try to stimulate the economy. And also, as we talk about stimulating the economy, there's also a couple of items on this budget that are somewhat expensive, about $200,000, but their purpose is to work with you all to figure two things out. On the administrative side, how do we streamline our development review process so that if, in fact, there's too much paperwork, there's too much bureaucracy, there's too many steps, there's too many hearings, whatever the problem is, let's see if we can shave some of that off, some of that unnecessary bureaucracy. That first study will show us that and what we can do. My gut is that's going to help you about 10-15% of your process. The second piece, which I think is the bigger problem, and that's for the second study that we're proposing, and that is you open up your code book and you look at everything that's there. These are all the laws that your previous colleagues over the years, since you've been in existence as a government, have passed laws. And every page on that code book tells a story. And most of the time, when there's words on that paper, it's because somebody reacted to something. Somebody cut down a tree that everybody loved, and next thing you know, you've got a tree ordinance. Somebody went ahead and put up a big, ugly fence. Next thing you know, you got regulations for fence. Somebody put the setbacks too close. Now you got setbacks. Every page of that requires government review. If the government says, geez, we don't like it when something like that happens, so we want to be able to approve it before it happens, the only way that you can be sure of that is if your staff requires developers to come in, show what they're doing, and then go through a review process. And I can tell you this, I don't think there's a city manager I've spoken to over the years that hasn't gotten the same complaint about, oh, it's just so hard to build in the city. And most of that comes because many of the development community doesn't particularly care or agree with some of the laws that you have on the books. I've been in cities where you have to go through an architectural review board to get them to approve your sign and your facade, and the community likes that because they feel that controls the look and feel of the community. However, the developers don't like it. So this study would kind of take the skin off this book and start looking through it and figuring out, is there some stuff in that code book that you don't really want anymore that's, and we know one thing already we've identified, haberdasheries, right, Joe? Haberdasheries, right, okay. So there's something about haberdasheries. My guess is if we eliminate that, you're still not going to, you're going to still get complaints because I don't think we've gotten any haberdashery applications in. So, but there's a whole bunch of things in there that you really should think about. You would have the conversation a couple of years ago about neon signs. Should you or shouldn't you, right? And so all of a sudden, storefront people were getting cited because they had neon signs, which are not allowed. And then it raised the concern and the debate about why should neon signs be illegal? Should they be allowed? How tall should they be? How wide should they be? How much coverage on the front? The problem for us as staff is, for each and every one of these issues, if you say, I don't want this or I don't want that, oh geez, I don't want somebody to coming in here and drawing up all the water, well, now you got to do a water study in order to make sure that your concerns are met. And now we tell the developer, oh, go do the water study. That costs them money. Or they're going to build a shopping center and they have to go ahead and do a traffic study because neighbors have told you, geez, we're concerned about traffic. We've heard that a lot with the charter schools and some of the shopping centers. Well, in order to meet that concern, you've got to force them to do a traffic study. That costs them money and it costs them time. So these are very serious issues. They speak to the quality of life of the community, and they are pure policy. These are issues that you all will be able to think about. You'll have, we think we're gonna assign this big task to Weiss Sirota with James at the helm, but we're going to talk about that because we were thinking about, geez, we should bring in an expert to think about how to revamp the code. And James is like the historian, and he's got a brain like a machine, so he knows just about everything that's transpired here over the last, James, 10 years, 15 years? So this is really the light at the end of the tunnel, growing your way out of the problem and collecting the new revenues without burdening the taxpayers. Here's the revenue side, and I think this tells the biggest story. Look at the left blue ad valorem tax piece of the pie. You collect $44.5 million. 22% of that is from your ad valorem. Only 22%. Oh, and guess what? Look at your public safety number on the right. Your public safety spends $23 million. So if you go back, you got 22%, which represents, Carlos, how much?
A little over $9 million.
$9 million, your total revenue stream for ad valorem, and your public safety costs $23 million. So it's not even paying half of your public safety expenses. General fund budget, adopted budget, $40,432,431, proposed $44,579,299, and that represents a 10% increase from the prior year, and we'll explain where that increase comes from. And this kind of speaks to the cost of living issues that we spoke about. First one, over $1 million increase in health care costs. And so that's a big expense. Pension costs, slight increase this year. It always helps with your pension expenses when the stock market is doing well, and so we haven't seen the same hits this year as we've seen in the past when the stock market was diving. And then the transfer from general fund reserves to deal with the City Hall project management. That is an expense that you didn't have last year, but this is really what you should be using general fund reserves for because it's a non-recurring expense, $1.2 million. You can see here on this sheet the 5 police officers. That's just realigning last year's budget. This is not an additional 5 police officers. This is the 5 that you approved last year, and the budget is just being realigned to reflect those 5. The department is asking for 1 additional code enforcement officer, and then the 2 studies that I mentioned there are reflected in development services. And we're also, when you see there on the line, police additional operations at temp site, that is to take the expenses that used to be over at Parks and Recs for the stadium and to move that over to the police department since that's going to be their home for the next couple of years. And then we also have on the line, it's $50,000, and I wanted to point this out to your attention because as we talked about growing our way out of the problem, we have budgeted $50,000 to have a presence at the shopping center exposition next year. We scoped out the conference last year, and there was plenty of cities there. And what was nice about that was that when we spoke to the individual cities that were represented there, every developer, every shopping center owner, everybody that's anybody in the development community goes to this conference, and the cities are there, all the retailers are there, and they set up appointments, and each one of those cities could say they could directly point to something that that conference brought to their city by setting up all these meetings. So we've budgeted $50,000. Councilman, yes.
George, on that is that I'm glad that you put that in the budget because that conference was well worth our attendance, and I think to be a part of it actually will be very beneficial to the city. So I just want to echo that, because that was a very good conference, and learned a lot from that. So I'm glad you put that in the budget.
Appreciate that very much, and certainly if we go forward with this, we would encourage all of you to help us with that, come and represent the city, and we'll set up a whole bunch of meetings. And it was interesting, many of the elected officials were manning the booths, and many of the staff members were in with the meeting with the developers, and it was great synergy between electeds and staff, and we're hoping to accomplish that. It's a very complicated process. We need to get an architect to design the booth, and there's an approval process. The pages, Rick, how many pages were there?
It was about a 375-page application.
370. So if you think it's difficult to develop here in Homestead, just know to put a booth up at this conference, it's 370 pages. Okay, anything else here? Oh, the retail study. The retail study is another piece that we wanted to talk to you a bit, and this is, if we're going to do this parking garage, we have already met with a couple of the companies, and some of them were actually at this conference. What the company does, and whether it's one company or another, they pretty much do the same thing. They all buy the data from the credit card companies. So in essence, what they know is every single transaction that occurs in the world using MasterCard, Visa, Discover, American Express, and they have this giant database that will tell them just about anything about the people who spend in your city, and also the kind of business that that your city can absorb. So what we'd like to do is hire one of these companies, and we'd like to bring them in and do the analysis and get a sense of where are we under-retailed, what kind of retailers can we absorb in this city, and what kind of needs do they have as we design, assuming we go forward with the parking garage, as we design that first level of retail. Do they want long bays? Do they want big boxes? What kind of retail? And they said we can have a study within 60 days. So we'll have some recommendation for you shortly. What they do is they analyze the data, and it'll also help us with the tourism possibilities as well, because they'll tell us who's spending money here, where they're coming from, what kind of things they spend on. And it's also an interesting thing. They told us in some communities, they can actually tell you which are the most popular beers. And so with the local pubs will be able to then use that data to satisfy the demand of their customers. And so that's just one small example of how the business community can really benefit from knowing the spending patterns of people who are here in the city. Council requests, just a small list here. Holiday community event, $15,000. Martin Luther King musical, $20,000. Bike festival, $15,000. Additional funding for 4th of July, $13,000. Increase in general liability, $163,000. And the other increases involve revamping our cable TV operation, filming of the council meetings, and some of our video operation, which I think so far we're doing really well in communicating with the public. CIP, we discussed CIP at the last meeting. This is what we're recommending that be funded. This goes to the question of planning and zoning and building, and that is the system is so antiquated that it's virtually impossible at this point to properly track any encumbrances on each individual properties. As you know, some of the lawsuits we had, because decades ago there was an encumbrance on a property, it wasn't properly logged in the system, and then permits were issued, and then and this system will help us not only in addressing those to get compliance with our codes and our fees and our encumbrances, but it will also help us to try to automate and give some better customer service so people can do some permits outside the building without having to come in. At least that's the hope, that's the goal. The network server is a small item, Ford Explorer, core switch, and 9 police unmarked vehicles. This gets us to a total project cost of $1.1 million, and it's only $181,000 general fund impact. Citywide, we get down to the bulk of the expenses as normal comes from electric utility, although it's less this year. Normally they're doing about $3 million a year. This is $2.2 million. Software and sidewalk improvements. This gets us to a total of $5.6 million in all the other enterprise funds. And as you can see, our total enterprise funds budget is $100.3 million, with about 63% of that coming from the electric utility. And then finally, I did, since Councilman, you mentioned this, and I promised I would kind of address the issue of the CRA and where that money is coming from. Everybody's got a certain need and desire, and I think all would agree that the CRA, it'd be better if the general fund would be paying for those police officers, and hopefully one day we'll be able to gravitate towards that position. This is also an example of electric utility. People have said, geez, we should have lower rates. Well, every dollar that you lower rates means less dollars that you get. And so at some point, if you keep getting less and less dollars, you're going to have to raise taxes to accommodate that. So it really is, it's your pockets. They're all there. You may move one money, but at the end of the day, you're paying for the services that you want, and they've got to come from someplace. And at some point, you just have to either reshift everything and go back to the public and say, well, we're raising your taxes because we want lower rates, or we're raising your taxes because we want more money to go to the CRA. We're realigning things for decisions that were made in the past. Or you just, for the time being, try to glide your way out of this problem, which is the strategy for this year anyway. All funds, $178.5 million. With the enterprise funds representing the vast majority of that. And if you look at that blue, of all that budget, $178.5 million, only 25% of that comes from the general fund, and more than half of that goes to police, and less than half of that is paid for by ad valorem. So it's really, it's not very complicated. There's just not a lot of money to go around. It's just as simple as that. Okay, so here's where we're at. Adopted to propose 6.7% increase. You saw the issues with why the increases are there, and this is the chart where we just wanted to show you everybody wants more. We just did one code enforcement officer this year, but that's it. And we'd love to do more. It's just that the money is just not there. The council requested action, adopt the proposed millage rate, operating mill rate 5.9215, debt millage rate of 1.0100, adopt the fiscal year 2014-2015 city budget. People who have not yet looked at the budget, feel free to go on our website. It's right there. We would encourage people to look at it, print it, come down, talk to us, call us. We're happy to answer any questions. We feel that the more people know about what's happening in the budget, the better off we are and they are, and the more supportive people are of what's going on here. Final budget hearing September 23rd. And this is the famous dollar. I know you all love it. We love it too, because what it shows is only 29% of the tax dollar, property tax dollar, goes to the city government. So that's a very small percentage of the total dollar. And then finally, this. And I wanted to do this for several reasons. First of all, as you know, I've been in other cities, and what impresses me most about your staff is that they have a tremendous affection for each other. They love each other as family. And they also love the citizens of the city. They get up every day and they serve the people in the city with affection, with dedication. And what I also found as we all traveled the city during the bond referendum is that I think the public here has an affection for them as well. And so we wanted to put this little thing together because, at the end of the day, everybody on your staff made a decision about how they're going to spend the rest of their lives. And they made a decision that they're going to dedicate themselves to serving others. And as you see the pictures on the screen, you're going to see that, no matter where you are in this organization, you're serving people in need, you're serving people, you're doing important things for the public. And we're very grateful to you all for making sure nobody got thrown overboard, the support that you've all shown for the city. And also when you look at the pictures, we got these books sitting here with all these numbers, but it's the things on the screen that really represents what's in those books. And I would like to thank the staff as well, because it's been a tremendous honor to work with them all. And with that, I'm going to cue the tear-jerking music, hoping we'll get a couple of tears out of this. And with that, here we go. Thank you. Thank you. We've seen the worst of times, I think, economically, hopefully in our lifetime. And as things got worse and worse, I saw all over the country the public turning on their government employees because they're the ones that they could shout out to because they were upset and they were nervous and they were angry about their own economic conditions. And it's been tough over the years to be a public employee, knowing that you're out there every day trying to serve the public and the people are worried about their own economic problems. But I can tell you this team that you have here continued to smile. They continue to go on with no raises year after year. They continue to get up every morning and clean up the mess and the sewage spills and make sure the water is clean and the toilets flush and the electricity goes on and that the burglars are not in your backyards. And the truth of the matter is, it has been a tremendous honor not only to work with your staff, but with you all and with this city that is something really special. And I would just like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to serve your citizens. And with that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. We appreciate the whole effort behind the budget. I know it's tough. And are there any questions from council members? Mr. Williams, Ms. Waldman.
I'll let Ms. Wallman go.
Ms. Waldman?
Well, you better, because I'm a mess. I hate you, George. I know I love you, but you guys, you are the best. You really are. And I've been here in really, really bad times and in out of this world good times. And we are so lucky. And he does it to me every year. How can we ask questions when he does this to us? But I just want to say it was great. You did great on the budget. And I'm a mess now for the rest of the meeting.
Mr. Williams.
So much, George, and to the staff for their Hercules of a job and what they do every day for persons who aren't on the same social economical status, but they try to treat everybody the same. And so we're very appreciative for their work and their commitment to what they take in pride and joy. And then to you, Mr. City Manager, for such wonderful leadership that you have provided to them and wonderful direction and carrying out our policies here from this dais. And so,
Thank you.
Without taking away from all of that, I do have some practical numbers questions. So let me start by asking you about what do we have in terms of savings or money in the bank, or how should I say, our savings account or our rainy day fund? What is what do we have in?
Well, I'm going to give you a complex answer to a complex question. You've got each of the enterprise funds have reserves, as does the general fund, and each of those reserves have undesignated and then
Unrestricted,
designated.
right.
So what we'll do is we can put together a spreadsheet for you that'll go through each one of them. But we have substantial funds right now. Certainly over the last several years, our attempt has been not to touch the general fund at all. You have a policy that says 10% of your general fund
Has to be put away.
has to be earmarked for reserves. We have well in excess of that. Carlos, we're about, what, 25, 30%? Where are we?
We're closer to 40 to 50%.
Okay,
And
but-
that includes reserves unrestricted?
That includes the approximately $4 million of the 10% that's reserved, yes, sir.
So what's the total then that we have? You're saying 4 million that we have in reserve?
It's, in the general fund, it's approximately $20 million.
20 million in reserves, okay, very good. And then you say you'll get the spreadsheet for me for the rest of them, right?
Right, and also, what was really nice about having those reserves is that as they went and discussed the bond rating to the bond rating agencies, the fiscal health of the city.
Absolutely.
One thing that they did recognize is our healthy reserves that we have, but also one warning they had for us, which is you keep spending, if you start spending them down, eventually your bond rating will suffer, and it makes everyone nervous. So that's why that $5 million over time, we need to stop digging and start getting out of the hole.
Right. Talk to me about in the general fund, the unrealized loss that we did of $627,000.
Good question, Councilman. Unfortunately, when we, any investment holdings that we have, we're at the year end is basically when the market conditions and that's when we have to evaluate it. And last year, I don't know if you recall, but the market kind of took a little bit of a dive, so a lot of the holdings that we had those unrecognized losses, and for financial statement purpose, we had to show it. This year, we're hoping to show the complete opposite, but we still have to wait until the end of the year, because that's when they're valued.
All right. Also, the internal auditor, I see that the actual expense that we did last year was 91,000, and then you're proposing 128,000 this year. Is that completely administrative or salary?
That's for the internal auditor that was hired by, by the city. The budget that we set for them was 128,000 annually, and if you recall, they came to this council and had a 3-year plan. So every year, at least for the next year, we plan on setting aside the 128,000.
Okay, all right. Let me talk a little bit about, I don't have any questions with the attorneys or the clerk's office, but I do have some questions on development services. The professional services of 273,000, what is that figure?
Those are for the special projects that we do as a city, or individual applications that the city would put through. So when we start dealing with the stuff that we're doing in our downtown, we'll be using it for that, or any special projects that come about, or city initiated applications that we would do.
Okay. And the legal fees, cost recovery, and management consulting fees, and the marketing, I see that it's you're proposing a hike from 24, which you spent, to $75,000. What is the purpose of that?
The cost recovery fees are estimates that we anticipate with the increase of development. We have a cost recovery ordinance, and so when an applicant comes in for an applicant-initiated project, we will put our consulting team on that. That includes planners, traffic people, attorneys, advertising, those types of things. The $50,000 for the marketing is in part the trade show that we plan on attending this year.
Councilman, and for cost recovery, we have a matching revenue. So anytime you see an expenditure with cost recovery, there's a matching estimated revenue to cover it.
I did see that. Moving on to general services. I don't have anything for that. Let me ask you a question. In your general administration department, the special events went from 76,000 to 157. Is that inclusive of what George is recommending in the budget?
Yes, the majority of that, except for the 13,000 for 4th of July, that's in the Parks and Rec.
I got you. All right. Okay. My biggest issue, I'm moving on to the police department now. Last year, we proposed, we're proposing this year of $1.1 million in overtime. Last year, we spent $1.6 million in overtime. 542,000 of that is the difference. How are you going to maintain that overtime expenditures that we leap from 800,000 to 1.3 thousand? It's a $500,000 increase. How are we justifying that? Who did the budget for the police department?
It was a conglomeration of the chief, command staff, and Lieutenant Bell.
So how are we justifying $500,000 in addition for police overtime? Now, don't tell me about grants, because I see that from the GOT and the DOJ and the DOT. That's 578,000. But that doesn't. That's in the confiscated part of the budget, not in the police department.
Yes, sir. If I may call Lieutenant Bell out, he actually came up with the specific numbers and probably can explain it a lot better.
Yeah, because that's a lot of money, 1.6 million that we spent in overtime this year, based on 800,000 that we budgeted. So how can we keep that under a level of control to where, because every year, realistically, the general fund increases about $1.5 million in police budget. The $1.5 million in police budget indicates, from my sitting up here over the years and being over finance committee, that it's usually in pension and other things. But as we know, as overtime and all of that, that increases all of those other expenditures. So the $1.6 million is a real red flag that I'm really concerned about.
Councilman, what page are you looking at, please?
I'm on y'all page 28 of the police budget. Oh, I don't know, I didn't.
Is the cover blue or white?
Yeah, it's a new one,
So
but all mine is marked up with it, because I've been on this for about a week now. But it's the police budget.
Lieutenant,
In the
do
old
you
book-
have an answer?
In the old book, it's 28, page 28.
Councilman, you're saying 1.6?
I'm saying you actually spent 1.3, but when I add the confiscated of 334,000, it comes out to $1.6 million.
Yes, sir, there's a lot of operations that are funded from confiscated property each year.
So how do you explain the increase of about $500,000 from 800 proposed to 1.3 million? How do you explain $500,000 increase in overtime beyond what you have already put in the budget for overtime? You actually put 866,000 or spent 866,000 in overtime or proposed, but when you add up all the police categories and its division, you actually had $1.3 million that you spent.
As opposed to 1.6, you're saying right now when you add in forfeiture?
When you add the forfeiture. Why? My question is, how did you increase $500,000 from your 800,000 that was budgeted? Why did you go over what you proposed?
You're asking why we exceeded the
Yes.
budget amount?
Yes, you exceeded the budget amount by $500,000 of overtime.
Yes, sir, overtime is a compensation for the shortages that we've had all along. As you know, we are fundamentally understaffed compared to the population that you have at the moment. Now, splitting between general fund and confiscated funds, most of the monies out of confiscated funds deal with specific operations, some of our task force
Right,
operations,
the
other things.
DOJ and the Department of Treasury.
And grants added to that and all the other areas.
Right.
So those are more specific overtime expenditures, and a lot of those, we actually get money back from
Right, I
different
got that.
agencies.
We get back $578,000.
But on the general fund side, the money's there where we have run over budget, and we executed a budget transfer this year to cover some of that because we had shortages of staff. As you know, we were increasing personnel. We lost some personnel this year. We added some. But continually, overtime is a compensation to a degree for shortages. Now, we're actually, in terms of the monies that we have spent, I compared last year to this year, and while we have exceeded the actual budgeted amount so far, we are actually on a decrease to the amount of overtime spent out of general fund. It's not a large decrease, it's about 4.5%. And mainly that is in reductions in shift shortages for this year. We're starting to see that change. As we added these officers, we're starting to see the reduction in some of the overtime due to shift-related shortages. We also have reductions in training-related overtime, and we've had reductions in call-in overtime. So we're starting to see a downward drop in the amount of overtime spent.
I guess my question is to George and to Major here, in representing for Chief, is that we write into the budget $800,000 just for overtime. But we have gone over that by an additional $500,000 to $1.3 million in just overtime. If we are adding officers, and this is my philosophy, if we add the officers that we say we cannot afford, wouldn't that decrease the overtime? If we took that number that they're adding for overtime and cut that in half and added 4 more officers, wouldn't that philosophically cut the budget? Wouldn't that cut the overtime? I know there's court costs. I hear that all the time. I know court is expensive, but how can we, at $1.3 million, shift that to adding more officers like we're adding so that we're not at so much overtime? I understand that we've lost about 7 officers in this process. But wouldn't it make fiscal responsibility to add more officers to decrease the over the course? Because every year there is every year there's almost, when I first got in, there was almost $1.2 million just for overtime, period. I mean, that was just a line item by itself for police department, just 1.2 million. So how do we at some point say, okay, if we add more officers, decrease the overtime? I know it's probably in the air somewhere and it's probably not real, but looking at this, it just, something to me says if we add more, then this should be able to decrease the overtime by a significant amount. How do we compare, Carlos, to other municipalities with their overtime with their police department?
Oh, sir, I haven't done that analysis.
Would you, if my colleagues would help me and ask that you can do an analysis for us so that we see where we compare to other police departments our size, you know, throughout the state or however, given the population.
Comparison becomes very difficult though, because every community is
I
different.
I understand that crime rate's different, but just overtime, I understand. But just so that I'm able to look to see where do we...
Even overtime, for example, in Key Biscayne would be different than...
Absolutely, but I'm giving the parameters in which of the scope of services I'm asking for, you know, for the analysis. So so how, George, or how can you perhaps, and that doesn't include the overtime for the CRA, by the way. So how do we...
I think I can speak to that because we had this conversation last year.
Yeah, I mean,
it's our annual conversation, which is fine, and it's a good conversation to have. Depends on which department you talk to, which chief you talk to, which lieutenant in charge of administration you talk to, but each of them will say something different about overtime philosophy. In my experience, the more police officers you add, the more your overtime goes up. Because what ends up happening is as your staffing complement goes up, your level of service goes up, and then they use overtime to backfill whoever is gone from that pool of people. And so the idea that if you just took half your overtime and put more police officers in, that doesn't end up dollar for dollar in overtime, because once you put those police officers in place, some of them will take vacation, some of them will be sick, some of them will
I understand,
be
but
suspended or
I don't
whatever
get
it is.
1.6 million of it being that what you're saying. That's what I'm saying. I mean, that if you added, you know, what I'm trying to say is philosophical. How do we keep a handle or better maintain the overtime? Because it's really just egregious as I look at this and saying $1.6 million is just overtime in one department, when we know that they're more than 50%, 60% of the general fund. And so 1.6 of that, and then the police department budget goes up every year by $1 million. Every year I've been here, it's gone up $1 million regardless.
Just not sure that the number is egregious, and
No, well, that's my personal opinion. The number is egregious because it's more than what I've ever seen before. So I know we've had a lot going on this year, but it's almost 1.7 million, and just in overtime. So
the flip side to that, though, is that last year at this time we were having discussion about crime and concerns that people had, and I think that what they've been doing is the best they can to try to address the blips. And Major, maybe you could speak to that.
Yes, sir. Councilman Williams,
Yes.
Mayor, and Council, in regards to the increase in the overtime, a lot of it is incurring from the court expenses. If you have officers working the midnight shift or the afternoon shift, you have a lot of them, you know, with the productivity within the police department, we'll probably have higher statistics than most municipalities throughout Dade County as far as the amount of arrests, because we're very proactive in our enforcement. We work and meet monthly with the state attorney's office and the other judicial officials downtown and constantly address our concerns of the cost it's lying upon the city to have these officers go to court and the overtime expenses. So we keep that in mind, but unfortunately, we still have those expenses occurring, along with the pay raises, the normal pay raises,
Yes.
sometimes the staffing shortages and so forth.
Major, could you speak to, because you go to court every year, so could you speak to why the increase? Are you saying that there's increased visits to the court, or is there something else?
The judicial system, we're not going to change the judicial system as far as an arrest goes. If there's an arrest, depending on the type of crime it is, misdemeanor, felony, it goes through a process. If it's a minor traffic violation, you're usually only going to go maybe one, maximum 2 times for a traffic violation. But if it's a case involving a felony where it's a burglary case, that one specific officer or the number of officers involved, which include the detectives involved in the investigation, they could end up in court they're going to go to a pretrial conference.
Right, I understand.
Depositions, numerous continuances made by the court system. We really don't have any control as far as reducing that. We stress constantly to the state attorney's office, to try to streamline it and reduce those costs, but we're kind of at their will as far as.
Yeah, and I'm not beating up on the police department at all. I'm just as a conservative person that has been given the due diligence to sit up here and be governing over the affairs of the city as it relates to money. It's my due diligence to ask these questions, and so I'm not badgering the police department in asking these questions. They're more so because on paper, when you explain it, it's the narrative is not in this detailed form. And I will make a suggestion that going forward, that when these increases happen, I used to get an email quarterly on overtimes. I have not gotten one in a couple of years now, but I used to get an alert. But hopefully going forward next year in preparation of the budget and your narrative, when these overtimes occur, if you would just state that in there, that will help those persons who on the outside may not have the privilege to be here tonight to be able to hear what these issues are. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, and so I'm moving on to confiscated property. The overtime, not the overtime, but explain to me the hardware that went from 3,000 to 46,000, and professional services on page 45 in my old book, $0 to $55,000, and travel and training from 2,000 to 30,000. What was the significant increase for that? And that's dealing with the confiscated property expense of the Treasury.
Specific to Treasury?
Yeah, on page 45 in my old book. I'm sorry,
I don't have that same book, Councilman. Give me just a second, I'll look it up.
No problem.
The 3305 on Treasury on professional services is used to a degree to pay some of our CI funds.
CI, come on now, you got to speak English.
Our informant funds.
Okay.
And
Okay, thank you.
also some of the medical expenses for the canine dogs that are assigned to that unit.
Okay, so that has significantly increased for that amount?
No, what's happening is some of the state CI monies are decreasing. So with this, excuse me for a second there. So we allocate monies to make them available within the federal funds, but it doesn't mean we're going to spend it.
Okay.
Because a lot of those funds are, when certain things come up, we'll spend the money for the informants and for certain types of services. And if you don't have it budgeted, you don't have that available to you. So you'll see quite often that we budget higher.
So there's some things in
spend it.
this budget that's fluff that you may not spend, or that you allocated in just in case that you do need it, it's in the budget. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, for certain types of investigations, you don't know exactly what those expenses are going to be. So the money is available for it, but
Gotcha.
it stays
I don't mean to use the
within the
word fluff,
fund.
but yeah, I'll take that back.
But bear in mind that every budget is an estimate of your revenues and expenses. Every
I
line
understand.
item is an estimate, and
Budget is just a guide, but I'm trying to be guided. The lease payment in the confiscated property from 229 to 455, what is that?
The lease payments in there are pretty much exclusively the Dodge Chargers that we've been purchasing
So we're
the last
paying,
two rounds.
so that's not coming out of general fund, that's coming from confiscated?
Some of the Crown Vics that we still have were funded from general fund.
Because I thought that came out of the general fund, I didn't know that came out of
The
the,
last two purchases that we've come before you for the Dodge Chargers
yeah?
and some of the confidential vehicles, the unmarked type vehicles, are typically funded from forfeiture. There was simply not enough in general fund, and we were able to make it work through forfeiture.
Okay, all right,
But there are still some lease payments in general fund for some of the other Crown Vic vehicles.
okay, all right, okay. Thank you. I'm moving on to the electric department, and I'm done. The professional services in the utilities department, account number 401-3305, went from 75,000 to 210,000. What was the jump in that figure?
Which account was that again?
I'm sorry, the 401-2100-531-3305. It's on page 65 in my old book. The electrical utility department. It's under the Ivy Plant Operation Division.
I have Ken Conkle coming over.
Okay.
try this, Councilman. If they can't find it, we're just going to cut
Absolutely.
it out.
Okay.
See how they do now.
Well, while they're switching seats, also talk to me about the St. Lucie projects and these expenditures that go out to them. Are we paying them for power, or how does that work? These Station Tri-Cities and Station Unit 1 and 2 and Progressive Energy, what's the relation with that, so I'm clear on
Yes,
that?
we're a part owner in the St. Lucie Power Plant,
Okay,
and we pay our percentage of cost for that power plant.
okay, all right. And that's also with the others?
Correct.
Okay, all right, okay. I'm sorry, I got y'all all twisted up tonight. I'm sorry. I don't know, they know I'm over finance committee, I gotta at least do my job.
Councilman Williams, Mayor and Council.
Yeah.
On the professional services,
Yes.
the increase is mainly due to $110,000 that's budgeted for the site cleanup of the power plant property. That's been an ongoing project that began in the mid-'90s,
Okay.
that has been going on. We hope to have it finished up here in a couple of years.
How much more money is it gonna take?
It's budgeted on a yearly basis. Of that $110,000, actually, that's a 25% cost share.
Oh,
The other
okay.
75% comes from the state.
Oh, great, okay, all right. In your budget narrative, may I ask George, late next year, that when I see a lot of these height numbers, it rings red flags to see exactly what is bringing on the cost. So if they may see that, then they are able, in their budget narrative, to be able to articulate, those costs. I think that's all my tabs I have. I'm not going to deal with customer service because they'll be here all day. But with that, and I'm not going to deal with parks either because I have to pick my battles wisely. So,
Thank you, Councilman. Good job.
Vice Mayor, and then Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a follow-up question dealing with some of the questions we had on the police department and adding police officers. I know that in the past, we kind of set a policy that we wanted to try to increase the number of officers every single year if at all possible. We did a great job last year. We added, I think, I don't remember the total, but it was a good number of officers that we were able to add to the force. But I see this year that we have a code enforcement officer, but not a police officer. What's the philosophical idea for that? Because I agree we're probably short-staffed in code as well, but I think that, public safety on the police side is probably more important than, say, the code enforcement side, and I wasn't sure what the reasoning was for that.
Councilman Shelley, Mayor and Council, we would always entertain the offer if you want to provide us additional police officers, but when we looked at the budget this year, the fact that we received the 5 officers last year, and then looking over at code, realizing that with the increase in the population, with the bond referendum as far as the downtown area and so forth, we thought it would be better suited to address it by adding an additional code officer to conduct enforcement with code enforcement. We just felt it was better suited to ask for that position this year versus the fact of asking for any more.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because, again, I think, for me, the more police officers we can add, I think we kind of committed to the community that we'd make a bunch of them and then we try to add at least one officer a year going forward, budget allowing. And so I know sometimes the money's tight. We don't really have a whole lot of money. So, if we don't have the money, we don't have the money. But in this case, I noticed that we had, a code officer. So I was thinking, well, we obviously had some funds that we could have put toward police instead. So that was just my question, why we made that, why the police department felt that was the way they needed to go. And just one clarification.
Just a little added further is, we added the 5 officers, which was great. Like I said, we can always use additional police officers, but we just felt that with the addition of the code officer and then addressing some of the code issues, that we could also washes the other hand of maybe reducing some of the crime problems that exist. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you, man.
Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mayor. George, as both a citizen and a council member, let me thank you, because I don't think that this city would be in the position it's in today through the last 4 or 5 years without your leadership and your ability to take your staff to the next level and make them do the things that we need to do on the limited budget that we have. So thank you to you, each department head, and every employee of the city, because it all, like you said, takes a team to do it. So thank you to everybody for that.
Thank
you. We have an increase in health care costs of $1,037,000. What percentage does that give us, Carlos, of an increase? Do you know, or does anybody know? And is that in line with what the standard is across for the country or for?
I believe it's about 12%. I know that last year we looked at the increase and compared to the national average, we were online. This year I didn't check to see what that is. I apologize, but we can certainly find out.
Okay, if we could find out, I'd appreciate that. I mean, I understand that they go up every year. When is the last time, and I know this is not a favorable question for anybody to ask, but when is the last time that we had employees increase their contribution to health care?
So it looks like. Hey?
Hello. The last time that we asked employees to increase their contribution was January 2005.
Okay, so 9 years ago. Okay. And could I get a number of what our health care was then and versus what it will be this coming year also? Sure. I guess at the next meeting or whenever an email could be given to us.
Sure, and also we have an executive session after the COW to talk about collective bargaining, and that's certainly one item that we can discuss in there as well.
George, could you just go back through the retail study and sell me on that a little bit, the $100,000 that you're requesting for on that, please?
We think the first year will be $50,000. It's going to be a discussion about whether we do a 2-year. The way they work is within 60 days they'll do the analysis and they'll come back to us with a specific list of specific retailers that would be interested or that would qualify for interest in this area. And so they do for us what they do for the retailers, which is what area would be good for me to expand my chain. And So what we then do is that we get that list, and then we start following up and seeing if we can get any recruitment here. The additional 50,000, assuming we go forward, and it would be optional, because the two firms that we looked at, each of them were about 50,000 for the initial study. The other 50 would be for follow-up and retention, because that's the other thing that they try to help you do, is try to figure out, of the retailers that you have here, what is it that you may need to be doing as a city to try to retain the retailers that you have. So it's a retail attraction and retention. The problem without having a study done is we don't know whether it's the dollar stores that are the right thing here, that's all you can get here, or you can get Saks Fifth Avenue or something in between. And so whether it's restaurants, whether it's retailers, it's big boxes, whatever it is, these firms, because they have the credit card data and they have the relationships with the retailers, and what they also said they would try to help us do is, if there is some on the list, because there is a symbiotic relationship between these firms, retailers, and the cities, is this data is also important to the retailers. So they pop somebody on their screen that says, hey, let's say Cheesecake Factory. Cheesecake Factory, we've looked at the numbers and you really qualify. This would be a great area based on the demographic study. Then you start chasing after Cheesecake Factory. If it's all 99-cent stores, then we're all going to have to really sit down and have a conversation about, do we really want to do street-level retail under the garage? And what is it that we hope to do long-term to reverse that trend? Because a lot of it is economics. They have, for example, one of the things they said was, average consumer at lunch will do no more than 7-minute drive time to get lunch. So who are the people in the 7-minute, and it's not miles, it's minutes, because it could be 1 mile or it could be 10 miles, but it's as long as it doesn't exceed the 7 minutes, they will then use the credit card data to find out what is your 7-minute range. Who are those people? What demographic categories are they? What kind of income? What are they spending? And then that'll help you determine what kind of retailers. And they'll actually spit out specific names of retailers, and we'll have a list by the time we're done with this. And most cities don't do that. The ones that do it are very successful in attracting retail. And if we're going to reverse what we have in the downtown, we really need to understand, what is it that will fly in the downtown? You don't want to be unrealistic and say, geez, we really need the Ritz-Carlton in the downtown and spend a whole lot of time trying to recruit them when they're going to hire their own demographic study, and the study will say, sorry, that's not a good area for you to go to. They won't even talk to you. On the other hand, and what's interesting about one of the firms is, if we go to the shopping center conference next year, is they have actually on a tablet where you can go to, let's say, Target, and you can hit the button and show them exactly what the study showed for your area in terms of demographics, drive times, and they're either on that list or they're not on that list. If they're not on the list, they won't even talk to you, because they do business with these same companies as well, and they trust the data that they get, and they have history with their data, because it's really it's raw data. Every time you swipe that credit card, they know what you're doing, and they also cross-reference the data with other databases they have. So even though they tell you, well, we don't know necessarily people's addresses, they cross-reference that with, for example, they know who uses CVS, who has the CVS value card, and then they cross-reference the credit card data with the CVS database, and then they can figure out who's buying what and what the income brackets are. And it's a fascinating science behind retailer studies, and the reason why you end up with a Longhorn here is because Longhorn does their research to find out whether they can make money here. They can also tell us, because they deal with all these retailers, restaurants, and what they can tell us is, what does a typical Longhorns do in sale? How well are they doing in the region? And you can kind of gauge the kind of needs that these particular retailers have in terms of parking requirements, location to areas. Some people want downtown, some people don't want downtowns. Some of them want to be next to movie theaters. So each of them have their own thing. And within 60 days, hopefully, we'll be able to have a discussion with you about what can you really expect in your downtown in the near future.
So this study will only include the downtown area, or we'll be able to use
The whole
this
city.
to attract anybody that we'd like to anywhere in the city?
Absolutely. And also, I think there was, one of the companies had a $10,000 add-on which would deal with the tourism element to this as well. And so we can start analyzing some of the tourism data as well, because what we asked them, and this figure was supposed to get back to us, is will they get us all as far back as the Keys? Because what we want to find out is who are the people that are going to the Keys, who are going to the national parks, where are they spending their money, and what are they spending their money on? Because if you're spending money on cigarettes and beer, it's different than if you're spending money on, prime steak and champagne.
Okay. All right, thank you. I guess just one follow-up on the insurance stuff. If we could get an estimate or some facts from some other municipalities as to what they ask for contributions?
Sure.
So that when we bring that, I could see that too.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, sir. Mr. Maldonado?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Manager, I would like to echo everyone's sentiments up here on what a great job you've done. I've continued to say that ever since I saw your resume come across my desk, and I said if you could do it in up north, then I think you can handle it down here. So great job on that, and as well as staff. Truly, we do see how you do care for the community. As I drive as a resident, I'm always here in Homestead, and I see everyone, and it's always a great joy knowing that, I get to serve on this council and work alongside all these great folks. I applaud you on the development services to studies, and I think, Mr. Corodino, I want to thank you. I know you had that conversation with him, and I know when we were in Tallahassee, we spoke about that. We've spoke about every time someone wants to build down here in Homestead, it's always some type of issue that's happening. And obviously, this past year, we've seen the hardship we've had to go through and sitting and trying to deliberate, what's going on here when we're dealing with rules and regulations and that are in place back from the 1940s still. So, I know that this is, it's a great idea. I know it's going to take us into the right direction. So I'm looking forward to that. Alongside, so I applaud you on that. So alongside of the Development Services Shopping Center Expo, my question is, are there any other expos similar to that besides shopping centers? And here's my thought. I made some notes here. And I could go back and say, let me ask this question. How much did we spend on the iconic attraction? And getting the results that we have, and now we have.
The actual study that we did?
Yes.
Rick, you remember offhand?
Rough number.
I think it's between 75,000, 75,000. For the two studies, there were two parts.
So I think, with that, if this comes to fruition, I think that's going to be a great investment. And so the reason why I bring that up is that I'm wondering if we should do this again for another topic or another item that was in our past, and I've been kind of inquiring about. Since I've always been here in Homestead, but there was one time I was living over in unincorporated part of Homestead, and moving over here. One of the reasons we moved over here, and if you guys who were here a long time recall that there was one time a discussion of the water park. Doing some history and speaking with some of the staff, we found out that there was at one time, through Commissioner Moss, a plan to bring a water park over here, because there was some monies that he had that he could have used to bring it forward. And from our understanding, for whatever reason, I know the reason, but for whatever reason, it did not go through. But the property that we were working with, my question is, what happened to the property? Is it still in our hands? And should we try to do what we did with the iconic attraction with a piece of property to the same property over there and kind of bringing that back to fruition, where the idea and going back to the reason, the question I asked is, what other conferences are there, like the Shopping Center Expo? Are there any other expos that will produce or give us some insight on recurrent revenue type of organizations that we could build or programs that we could build here in the city that's going to produce a revenue recurring type model? And so I'm thinking maybe we should look, we could probably start off with the city of Miami. I know they have a small water park and throughout South Florida, we have small water parks that are owned by the municipality, and see, is that generating profit while still enhancing the community and bringing even tourists over? So my question to council, maybe something I'd like to propose is that we start having that conversation. Is that something that we could bring back? Does it make sense that we look at that water park feature? It was there in the past. I know it was planned and everything seemed to be working well, and then all of a sudden, they pulled the money. And so, but if that's something that could work to our favor, I would think that would be another good idea to kind of bring that back.
Yeah, the water park is an interesting idea, and I've got two experiences with this. One was with our iconic attraction consultant who proposed a water park in Fort Lauderdale on the beach, and we were well on our way to doing one, and then the election changed and they decided to go in a different direction. But the second project I worked on was with Schlitterbahns to do a major water park over by the executive airport at the northern end of the city. And that project has been approved, and they're moving forward. It's a huge water park, and they're about the best there is in the water park business. So between those two contexts, I think we can definitely get you an answer to the question, is a water park something that would fly here? We may need to either hire a Jenkins or start reaching out to the individual, because all these water parks, it's the same thing as retailers. They want to know the demographics.
Exactly.
So, and then they want to know, is the land there? So we can get back to you on that. The reason we never suggested water park in the downtown is water parks are very specific. They're almost like the track. People, their whole business model is based on getting you to park, go in there and not leave until they close, so that you spend all your money in the park and you stay there. So typically those types of parks don't help downtowns, but they're also nice amenities for communities to have if you can get them, if you have the amount of land. And so, for example, in Fort Lauderdale, having a Schlitterbahns, when you have such a tourist-based community to begin with, that's a home run, because you have families coming and spending a week at a hotel. To be able to take the family for a day or two to the water park, that's really a big benefit to a city. That could be very beneficial here, too. It's just a function of doing the study and putting the time into it. I'd say we definitely could put it on the list. I can't promise it to you in a month or two, but people have been talking about it. Staff has talked about it as well, and Jenkins is probably the most knowledgeable because he's done so many different parks, about 1,000 projects all over the world, so he knows. And we can, Rick, maybe the next time you speak to him, see how long he would take to get us some sort of an idea of whether water park flies or not here. Okay?
I think, and again, that's why I asked the question about the conference, any other expos. Are there any other trade kind of shows?
Oh, yeah, I'll get to that as well. Yeah, the Schlitterbahns thing is amazing, because some of their water slides, they actually push you up instead of pushing you down, and they have this patented technology that actually literally lifts you up, and nobody else has that. So it's going to, and they're doing hotels in trees, so you can actually stay on the park, and you go and you stay in this little tree house in the park. So it's really neat operations.
And I think the location that we spoke about, Julio, we had spoken about the location is over there by Homestead, by the Homestead High School, correct? Was that?
Does anybody remember where the location was?
Originally, if I remember, the water park was proposed where the Roscoe Warren Park is now. That was the original. No, it wasn't.
It was between 344. Is a little farther west towards the Florida City, because part of it was in Florida City and part of it was in Homestead.
That's right.
It was a shared part. It was a shared location, so it's a little bit farther to the west.
Yeah. In that general area, yes.
Okay.
There's other conferences, and the reason we scouted out the conference this summer was just to make sure we knew what we were doing. So then we got you all there, assuming you approved the expenditure. We'd be ready to do it logistically. There's plenty of other conferences, so if you're all willing, we'll start putting together a list of some of the other ones that I think would be beneficial to the city. And some of them are even not to peddle your city's wares, but actually to see what other developers talk about. Urban Land Institute, for example, does a lot of neat things because they're also dealing with economic development, and they know there you get the developer's perspective. That's where they all complain about cities and why they can't get anything done. And but they also sometimes will give you success stories of what they've done in other cities, and also public-private ventures. So we'll start compiling that list. We know on the shopping center thing, there is one that's in Florida that's a smaller one. We picked the largest one because that one in the summer retailers are there, developers are there, architects and engineers, retail consultants, you name it, bankers are there. It's really anybody that does any kind of retail, shopping centers, developers. It was huge. Councilman, right? It was like you couldn't.
All in one kind of shop deal. And then they had great workshops where they had conversation with major developers and working and partnering with communities and cities. And so it was all in one. And so to me, that was that's like the conference that is the Super Bowl of all the conferences. You know, so if we were to do that, we would be going to the Super Bowl of the conferences, from my perspective, if in layman terms.
It was also surprising how few cities are there when it's a national thing.
Exactly.
Only a handful of cities, maybe 20, 30 cities.
Exactly.
Out of all.
So besides shopping center, this is
Yeah, it was
encompassing
beyond,
everything.
it's beyond
Okay,
shopping
so
center. That's just, I guess, the name over the years that it was, but it's far
Right, and the
beyond.
reason they call it shopping center conference is if you're a developer and you want to open up a shopping mall or a strip mall, you're shopping around for retailers.
Right.
And so what they found is many of the national retailers, they don't want to even talk to you till they have all their prospects in one room, and they'll book half-hour blocks, and they'll be there all week just dealing with, because they don't want to fly from place to place.
Mhm.
So that's really how the industry started to kind of synergize their efforts and get everybody together, and they're making deals. In fact, the $1 billion project in Miami, the World Center, all their developers were there talking to everybody they could get their hands on, and that's where they do the deals. A good portion of the deals are done right there on the site.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, we talk about, balancing our budget and not raising taxes and not cutting services. And as a businessman, unless you're doing something to generate a profit, to fuel this, you're always going to be, catching up from behind. So I think it'd be wise of us, that we're having this discussion. Now we're in position, because of you, because of staff, because of council, we're in the right position to be successful. So, it'd be great to see what's happening out there. And we need to be looking for items that are going to be, again, revenue recurring type systems that are going to bring in dollars. And I think, a lot of, you look at Orlando and it's, you have Disney, but you have everything else. And it's just why, it's the tax base is great because they have items that are producing, revenues. If you look at the city of Miami, Miami-Dade County, they have the port. They have an airport, and so they have items that are on their budget that are producing, and so that would be a good thing if we could start
And
working.
interestingly enough, when I was waiting in line at the airport to catch a cab, there was about 100 people in front of me. The person right in front of me, we started chatting. Turns out he is up north, but he is the partner in a real estate trust. And as I told him, I said, well, I'm from Homestead. He said, our largest package of properties in our trust is over in the Keys Gate area in Homestead. And so he was there too. And you'd be surprised who you end up running into over there. But what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Anything else, sir?
At the moment, that's it. I think I had one other item, but I'll look that up and I'll bring it back if I have to.
All right, Ms. Fairclough, then Ms. Waldman.
Yes. I'll be very brief because I know we've been at this for a minute. But I'd just like to join my colleagues in commending you and staff for the time and talent that have put into crafting this budget. I understand that the budget process can be very grueling and laborious. I've done that at school, and it's not a pretty picture, but you've done a great job at it, and I just want you to know that it's a pleasure to work alongside of all of you, and I value the work that you do day in and day out. I think it was a beautiful representation of family, our staff. And if I should venture to say myself, I think those of us up here, I like to consider us family as well. So we're just one big City of Homestead family. Right, so include us in that next year. It's not us and them. We are one. I just have one question under the general fund highlights, and this is for informational purposes only for me. There are additional requests from council, and council to me is plural, meaning all of us. So I just kind of wanted to know, I noticed there was a kind of spike in the requested amounts for events. So if you can just kind of share what precipitated the increase in funding requests for these events. Page 13. PowerPoint.
Good evening, Councilwoman Faircloth. One of the events that we raised up was the 4th of July. And of course, I'm pretty sure all council have been to our event on the 4th of July, and it has grew every year. This year was 25,000. Why we asked for 13,000 more is because now we have to add more police protection. Number 2, parking attendants, also for more lighting in the parking. And the other reason is you can't always depend on the sponsorships that we get. Because sooner or later, the well dries up. And from the last 2 years, it was from 57,000 in 2013. This year was 61,000. So we think the 13,000 would help us out on that. Sure. The other new event is the Holiday Community Party, which is held at the Audubon Clubhouse. This event, we asked for the funds for the catering, entertainment, tables and chairs, police protection, and for employee staff. And the last one I think we asked for was the Martin Luther King breakfast. That was the play, I'm sorry. That was the Atlanta South, which was a great event. I think last year we only got 900 people that came, but it was kind of like a short venue. So this year they wanted to go for more time at the FICO Williams Center. So I think that would probably get more people involved in that, which was a great play, and it really came out nice.
Thank you. Do we have a new proposal for the MLK musical? Do we have a new proposal?
I think that's one.
I think under special events, the MLK breakfast has $5,000. I think we have a budget on that. And I think CRA pays for the parade and the movie in the park.
Can I answer? No. Can I answer, George? Can I answer? The musical, I think, is what you're asking. Last year we had a shared piece revenue as it was, and the budget I think was 10,000. And this year it's one of my proposed items that I'm bringing that is increased. I met with the production company, and they've relocated here, so this is going to be a whole different level, more step it up a little bit more, and it's going to cost a little bit more for that. And I thought for purposes of culture and heritage within that month that would add some more culture and awareness to our community. So I thought it was would be an investment for the community of Homestead. So it was a spike of 10. It was last year 10,000. Then but there was a shared revenue expenditure in that as well.
That's it, Ms. Faircloth?
Yes.
Ms. Woolman, and then I'm going to open up the public hearing.
Yeah, I think the manager answered the questions. I was just going to tell Mr. Maldonado that being a member of the Greater Miami Visitors Convention Bureau, that many of the trade shows you go to, they're geared more to hotels and flights, and I've always wanted to go to that convention.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like Ms. Williams said, the Super Bowl of shopping centers, but I think it's important that we go to both national and state. So I don't know if that's enough in that budget of $50,000 to take us to both.
Well, and no, it wouldn't be enough because the cost of the booth, the booth would need to be constructed, and then also if it's constructed over there, you would hire a company over there to construct it, but then we'd want to move it over here, but then to move it to the next place and all that has staffing costs. So the only thing I would say is If you're going to do another one, I would suggest that you do something else so that we can just make sure we do this particular one right and learn from whatever we do right and wrong. But if you're interested in Urban Land Institute or something like that, we can also start looking for something that'll be less costly in terms of moving booze and all the other things. But we can find a few things that you might be interested in. Some of the ULI stuff is really
I'm
excellent.
just all for it. Thumbs up.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, this is a public hearing on the budget and on both items, so I would like to open up the public hearing at this time. Anyone who would like to speak for or against or ask questions about the budget, you're more than welcome to step to the podium. Mr. Maldonado, you had an additional question, follow-up, I think.
And
Well, I see no questions from the public. I'm going to close the public hearing and let Mr. Maldonado continue.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just give a second to the city manager to,
Carlos, do you? We had gotten a question about the DC.
What are we doing? He's got the floor right now, Mr. Maldonado.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, Jimmy, you asked a question. Is he going to respond to something right now?
No, I can wait.
Okay. Just I remembered, when we're talking about the studies and how I was, agreeing to your studies, a question I had in regards to the studies is, have we had one or should we have one in regards to the procurement process? I ask procurement because we're purchasing. And as a business owner, I'm always looking for the better deals or better process to streamline my business. And so with that same thought, have you guys considered where you at on that and how are we in that area?
What we had decided was on the first study, which is the efficiency piece of, the bureaucratic process. That one there'll be a procurement process, and then we'll come with a recommendation based on that process for which firm to hire to do that. And then on the second one, we initially thought we were going to do a procurement process for that, but I had an initial conversation with Richard Weiss. They're going to get back to me in terms of how much they think they would need. My personal preference would be to recommend that they do it because of James's experience and some of the other lawyers in the firm that understand what's on each one of these levels and why it was there. And and if that doesn't work out, then we do a procurement process on that study as well.
You misunderstood me, and that's fine. Our procurement, not the sense of procurement of who we're choosing to do the studies, our procurement process with the city and everything that we're procuring, that procurement office, staff, organization, that process, I call it buying. We're buying products all day to the city, computers, tires, all the items that we're procuring in the city. Is that process? Does that need a study? Does that need for us to look into?
You mean from the city's procurement?
Correct.
A study on what?
The process. Are we okay? I mean, we're talking about, I'm piggybacking off the studies that you have, the study that you brought forth. That's obviously going to put us in a better position. Do we need a study? Would we need a study from your perspective on our procurement process that the city does?
Right now, I wouldn't consider that a high priority because I think for the most part I think the process is working. We had made some changes a couple of years ago, and I think probably the biggest mistake we made was to up that local vendor preference to 15%, and I think it cost us something in terms of the bidding process for the city hall. But you all addressed that, and right now the last piece to that is this whole concept of cone of silence and its expansive nature where it prohibits us from having some conversations administratively to try to negotiate better pricing. And so Jerry right now is working with the lawyers on trying to figure out how to do something to be a little more flexible. We agree in concept that we don't really want we don't want electeds or staff being lobbied by vendors. We think that process should be, there should be a cone of silence. But once we have a general idea of where we want to go, we think it's kind of silly for staff to not be able to have some conversation about paring down some of the costs.
And I think, Jerry, I think you're hearing me on this, you know, is there, now that we're talking about budgeting and what we can do, piggybacking off the study that we're going to do with development services, do you feel like there's something that we could do to enhance that process besides what the manager just mentioned?
Well, following up with the manager, on the manager's statement, approximately 3 to 4 years ago when he came in, we actually did do an analysis of the procurement process. We looked at other municipalities, looked at their processes, and picked out the best processes that they were doing and incorporated into our new manual. And as of that date, we've been running that way. And to be honest, procurement really likes the new process the way it's working right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
With one caveat that if you are a vendor and you apply and you don't get the job, typically you're mad. And there's not much we can do about that.
That's fine. All right. Thank you.
Okay, this is just the first budget hearing, so we can go on for days.
There was one question the councilman had
Yes, go
about.
right ahead. Go right ahead.
It's just very quick. I didn't see in the budget, the Florida League of Cities trip, allocated in the budget. It's usually allocated in the, city managers, fund for the Florida League of City fees and all of that. Usually doesn't come out of the mayor and council fees, for the last couple of years. And also the, Washington DC trip, if we had to go up there to meet with our lobbyists or congressional delegation, usually that, would come out of the, manager's piece, and I didn't see that in there. And so my conversation with him was either to suggest what the amount has been, so that that we're able to cost it, just because in our budget our travel don't go up.
If you're all planning, if we're all planning to go as a group, then I would say we're going to need a budget item for that, correct?
If we do in the city manager's general administrative,
Right.
$17,000 allocated for basically 4 trips.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it was clear.
I can mention the ones that at least the ones that are highlighted here.
Go ahead,
I mean, they
yes.
could be interchanged for something
Because
else.
it's not in our guide, but I know
This is under the city manager, it's the
Right.
1800.
Right.
It's a DC legislative trip, the Tallahassee legislative trip, days, and state and local conference travel.
Okay, I just wanted, and we've always,
Bear in mind that over the last couple of years, the group hasn't gone to DC, so if you do that, I think you're going to need more than 17.
well, we've not done that, but that I didn't see it in the budget as we did last year, so I just wanted to make sure it was still in there, and you all have assured me that it is, so.
If you, though, think you're all going to end up going to DC,
I don't think so, but I was just raising.
I just want to get some direction, because if you think you are, we probably should move some from someplace else. Okay, we'll address that, we'll look at it, and we'll bring it back for the next meeting.
Yeah, but I knew it was out of the manager's fund. Thank you, George. Keep that line item.
Okay.
All right, any final questions? Is there a motion on tab 1? We're going to vote on them separately, right? Is there a second? I'm sorry, was it Ms. Waldman?
No, for a second.
Okay. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Councilman Maldonado.
He'll be right
Councilman
back.
Williams.
Yes.
Councilwoman Fairclough.
Yes.
Councilwoman Waldman.
Yes.
Councilman Burgess.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shelley.
Yes.
Mayor Porter.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Tab 2, is there a motion?
Move it.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Any final comments? Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Councilman Williams.
Yes.
Councilwoman Fairclough.
Yes.
Councilwoman Waldman.
Yes.
Councilman Burgess.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shelley.
Yes.
Mayor Porter.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move it.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.